Okay, well, good evening, everybody. I really appreciate you coming to our listening session. And this is our second night. Had a small group last night as well, but I thought an engaging conversation, or at least some good questions towards the end. So I want to introduce our team that's in front of you here. We'll work from your right, my left, starting with MAPS Board of Education Superintendent, Administrative Assistant Linda Hopper, Courtney Larson, who works in public relations. Bridget Joyce is from Myron. Craig Carmody is from IDI. Jim Lampman is our Assistant Superintendent of Finance. Isaac Roberts is from GEI. Travis Hongasto is IDI. And Todd Saberin is from Myron. I also want to take an opportunity to introduce some folks that aren't on the panel but are here with us tonight. Most importantly, our Board of Education members. We actually have 3 Board of Education members that serve on our facility planning group, and that's our President, Kristen Cambenzi, our Vice President, Jen Ray, and our Secretary of Treasurer, Jason Zadunik. We also have here tonight, in addition to Jen Ray, we have Cheryl Maddox-Smith, Cassidy Thomas, and Eric Smith. So thank you very much to our Board of Education for being part of this important project and being here this evening. Not here, but very much part of our planning. If you look on the screen is also PFM, they're a financial advisor, and Shroon Law Firm, who gives us counsel. As we go throughout this presentation this evening, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions. We'll save the Q&A until the end, but we're going to build in breaks, reminders for you to ask questions or give you the opportunity to ask questions. The QR code on the screen allows you to access a survey that can be completed at any point during the presentation. It's also on a easel over by Bridget there. She's pointing to it. If you want to use that link, you can submit those questions. You can also submit them by handwritten note. There's comment cards on the table outside of the entrance. Just hand them to Linda or Courtney during the presentation or during the Q&A, and we'll be sure to address your questions or comments. Our agenda for today, I'm going to start with a little background information. Then Bridget's going to talk about our survey. Craig's going to talk about, I'm going to use first names, it's more efficient. Craig's going to talk about school finance, a little school finance 101. Travis will talk about some potential investments, improvements, and then we'll have the Q&A. So I always want to ground these presentations in our mission statement. It truly is what we focus on. It's how we focus our finances, it's how we focus our programming, and it's how we focus our facilities. The mission statement is, with an exemplary staff and a rigorous curriculum, we truly are looking to maximize the academic potential of every child. We created this mission statement coming out of COVID when I took over as superintendent. It was clearly a need, not just this mission statement, but the strategic plan you're about to see. It was clearly a very pressing need that we had with COVID and the amount of impact that we realized, negative impact that we realized from that time where kids were isolated and sometimes not getting any education at all. So the mission statement, part of our strategic plan, we have 6 different groups that work towards that mission statement, and those 6 groups are all trying to row in the same direction, again, maximizing the academic potential of every child. This year's focus is actually social and emotional behavioral health appropriately, and that focus is very much going to be the foundation that I want to make sure I lay as I go through this presentation, which is why I'm going to talk a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As we talk about the foundation for this strategic plan that I mentioned and we talk about infrastructure, I think it's important that we remind ourselves that facilities, that infrastructure, that the learning environment is actually a key factor to students' learning. Maslow was he was a psychologist that did a lot of research on basically the humans' needs, and this hierarchy really is self-explanatory. The most basic needs, the physiological needs, safety, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, all are necessary in order for students to realize their full potential, otherwise known as self-actualization. And when you go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we'll talk a little bit about it today, again, I think you'll be able to see that infrastructure is actually a key player. Some of the things that we've done to address students' physiological needs, we have offered free breakfast and lunch, in large part thanks to a grant from the state of Michigan. That's all up in the air, by the way, right now, side note, because of some of the latest politics in Lansing. Filtered bottle filling stations. We know that kids are not going to learn effectively if they're hungry. And we know they're not going to learn effectively if they don't have safe drinking water. What was I think Travis yesterday, one of his lines that he used was safe, warm, and dry. Was a nice, easy to remember summary of what we're talking about when it comes to the actual learning spaces that need to be updated. You may or may not know that we provide a variety of programs to make sure that kids have appropriate attire, especially in the wintertime. We have Coats for Kids and Rock the Socks on there. Air filters and HVAC systems throughout our district, many of which are outdated. We have air filter systems that we're using to supplement, but our HVAC systems are generally very outdated. You'll hear more in a little bit. But the key point that I'm trying to make is when we're thinking about potential barriers to student learning, we're thinking about that pyramid that Maslow created. Infrastructure really is a key player to students being able to learn. Safety and security, always our number one priority. Some of the projects that we've taken care of already, we have security entrances, new entrances that are much more security, which included replacing our exterior doors, PA systems to help us communicate in an emergency, cameras throughout the district, many more than we had previously, a radio system, also key in communications, critical incident maps, and a variety of cybersecurity interventions or tools that we've implemented. 96% of our student staff in the community felt that kids were safe at MAPS, and that is always, to me, a celebration that I want to focus on. And before we're going to talk about anything with programming or for, of course, infrastructure, we're going to make sure kids feel safe. And we do know, again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that they're not going to learn if they don't feel safe. Keeping on with that theme, as I go through, I have a lot of what you would refer to as mnemonic devices that help me basically drive home points, hopefully, that you can remember. Safety, infrastructure, programming, our school improvement plan, if you will. Athletics, academics, the arts, the 3 A's that we always talk about. All of these different areas are targeted, have been targeted with the funds that have been available to MAPS, and we've been working on projects as indicated or as shown on the screen. But you'll see with over 750,000 square feet of buildings, it's just not enough. We get about $1.3 million a year in sinking fund revenue. Well, we've had over $100 million of critical infrastructure needs identified. 1.3 just isn't going to keep up with $100+ million worth of need. You're not going to keep up with the basic maintenance and the new need that comes from year to year. But what you see on the screen are some examples. You have the PA systems, the new doors, and the cameras on the top. In the middle, you have new parking lots, spoilers, and outdoor learning spaces or playgrounds. And in the bottom, we've done a lot of work with all 3 areas with athletics, academics, and the arts. And just to highlight the science labs in the bottom middle, the science labs, we paid for those renovations as part of sinking fund, with sinking fund dollars. Those science labs cost us about $1.3 million. And that's about what we get a year in sinking fund revenue. Just to give you an example of where the money goes, an entire year's worth of sinking fund dollars went to renovate science labs. So this is, again, model what I'm talking about. This past summer, we had $3 million worth of projects with a $1.3 million a year sinking fund revenue. Obviously, that's creating a shortfall. And it's not sustainable. We've taken money that we've been able to, I guess, stock away from grants, especially during COVID, money that we have, any kind of overage that we have in our budget, and we've put it towards capital projects, which has allowed us to make up the difference. But we're not going to be able to sustain that for very long. The iceberg analogy is always a nice way of illustrating a need. I talked about the $3 million of projects this past summer. That's great at chipping away at the $100 million, but unfortunately that leaves us $97 million to go. And that number is only going to increase. In May, this past May, the state released a study. They conducted a statewide infrastructure study, and they told public schools throughout the state of Michigan that there was $22 billion worth of critical infrastructure needs. $22 billion statewide. In MAPS, they told us that there was over $100 million of critical infrastructure needs. They also told us that there's over it would cost over $350 million to replace the buildings, and of course recommended that we repair them. But again, thank you, State of Michigan, for letting us know that we have over $100 million of critical infrastructure needs. We actually knew that from our own assessments, but now that you've made that public, we're going to go ahead and use that publicly, and I have used that publicly in conversations with legislators, asking them, well, now what? Because the state of Michigan is unique. Craig will probably talk about this in a little bit. Of the 50 states, roughly 38, I think he said, provide infrastructure funding. Michigan is one of 11 or 12, if I remember correctly, that does not provide any infrastructure funding. No funding for infrastructure, so which is why we have to go to our community, our taxpayers. I mentioned our own internal audits, that the statewide infrastructure study actually validated what we already had determined ourselves. We've been working on this for quite some time. The team, many members of the team that you see in front of you were part of that analysis. And we had also determined over $100 million worth of need. Not necessarily the same list, but similar enough that there's consistency. As part of that assessment, we also prioritize the need. And you'll see there roughly $61 million or a little over $60 million worth of high priority projects. That's reflected in what you would see in the survey as the base plan or the priority one project. So that $60 million is the highest priority, the most critical needs that we determined, our team determined from our analysis. And then of course the survey, as we'll get into later, has some other options behind that, beyond the base plan. But the most critical we determined was about 60 million of the over 100 million. The sheet that you see highlighted on the right with the red box at the bottom, that's a very long document that would be very hard to illustrate. But if you were to have the entire document, it would be quite extensive. This was a thorough analysis. A little bit about the timeline. In May of 2022, the community supported a sinking fund renewal. Thank you so much for that. A little bit less than 1 mil for that sinking fund renewal. We'll talk about mills shortly. Since the sinking fund up until essentially now, we've been doing the internal analysis that I mentioned. In May, the state released their infrastructure study. Starting in July, we had been working on a lot of our planning, but starting in July, we essentially assembled the team before you and started talking about a plan that you're really going to hear articulated this evening. The survey started hitting mailboxes on September 15th. Hopefully it found your mailbox, and if it didn't, we can talk about how to get you a survey. It's open until October 3rd, and then it's going to be presented. The results of the survey will be presented on October 13th at our regular board meeting. In November, the board is going to need to approve the scope. That's the specific list of projects. We're not going to get into a specific list of projects per se, but more categories of themes or themes of projects. But by November, we need to really have that dialed in for what we would refer to as a scope, because we bring that to our Treasury, Michigan Treasury. And in that meeting is where we really finalize and start the process of passing a resolution or getting to a resolution to go on a ballot, which we're hoping to do in May of 2026. So that's the end goal, is May of 2026. I think this is an important slide. We try to remain, we are fiscally responsible. We try to remain that way, and we will continue managing our resources as best as we possibly can. When you look at this graphic, this is comparing how much districts in our area levy in taxes. For us, it's a sinking fund and a small bond that was passed previously, but you'll see in this comparison, I think it's pretty clear that it illustrates not only fiscal responsibility, but quite a deficit when it comes to the amount of money, the amount of revenue that we generate from our local taxpayers to help us with infrastructure. And again, as I mentioned before, in the state of Michigan, this is the only way that we can deal with infrastructure needs. As part of our strategic plan that I talked about earlier, we surveyed the community, and as part of that survey, we did ask taxpayers, parents, how they felt about the way or the manner to which MAPS has managed our resources, including facilities, including bonds, previous bonds. And 81% of our staff and 88% of our community were satisfied with how we had previously used those millage dollars. And I thought that was an important statistic. I want to remind you that throughout this presentation, you're more than welcome. I actually encourage you to ask questions. We'd be happy to entertain them at the end. I'm going to give it a couple minutes before we pass over to Bridget, but if I could just, in closing, make a couple general comments. First of all, we have over 750,000 square feet of buildings. Some of the numbers we're throwing around are significant numbers, upwards of $100 million. That's a lot of money. But when you think about 750,000 square feet of buildings, many of which are 60, actually the average age of our buildings is 60 years old. Many of our spaces are outdated. If you look around you right now, you will get a pretty good anecdote or pretty good example of the condition of our facilities. And you look at the floor and you look at the stage, you look at the lighting, and some of the infrastructure you may not see is very outdated. Average age 60 years old, over 750,000 square feet. It's not necessarily my expertise, but hypothetically, were we to update the 750,000 square feet, and let's just say that it was $100 a square foot, which anybody that works in the construction market would know is far below market right now in construction. $100 a square foot, you're not getting anything done. But let's just say for a hypothetical that we were. At $100 a square foot, at 750,000 square feet, that's 75 million. Just to give you an idea of where some of these numbers are coming from. Our millage rate, which I mentioned before, is very low, and the $1.3 million we generate from sinking fund revenues is very helpful, but it's not going to be enough for the significant need that we are realizing, not just from our own analysis, but from the state. We very much value the partnership with our community. I very much appreciate you coming tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Bridget here to talk a little bit more about the survey, but thank you again for coming, and hopefully we can answer your questions. Thank you.
I hope everyone had enough time to fill out the survey if they have questions. May I steal the clicker from you? Oh. Thank you. Alrighty. So we're going to talk a bit about the survey, but before I get into that, I'm Bridget Joyce with Myron Construction. My title at Myron is an Education Engagement Specialist. So basically what that means to you guys is that I spend all of my time working with school districts throughout the Midwest on bonds and referenda, and helping them educate their communities on the potential projects and what that might mean for them and their students. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the survey process that we're going through, and hopefully clarify any questions that you guys might have. So just to kind of ground us in the process, this is a slide I like to share just to kind of reiterate the fact that the district isn't asking for your survey responses just this one time. They're going to come back to you again and again asking for your feedback and your engagement at various levels and various means and methods, starting with presentations like this one. But the survey is a really key component to that piece that will help formulate a potential bond proposal project. 3 goals when we were talking about engagement: share, inform, and understand, which is what we're going to be continuing to do, like I mentioned, starting now and actually starting 3 to 4 years ago when MAPS really started in this process and started digging into their buildings deeply to see what those facilities needs might entail, and continuing all throughout an entire or a potential bond proposal project. We're really focused on listening and gathering feedback from the community members, because this is your project, this is your school, and these are your students. So we want to make sure that any proposal that would show up on a potential ballot question is matching up with what our community will support. So like I mentioned, next step in the process that we're talking about here with engaging you guys as a community is asking you to fill out that district-wide survey that you, I hope, got in your mailboxes already. It's an 8-page survey that was sent to you guys by a company called School Perceptions. They have done over 1,000 of these surveys with districts throughout the entire United States, and have a over 90% indicative survey response, like accuracy in providing statistically valid and indicative data. So basically what that means for you guys is that they're going to give the board and the administrative team the results of that survey after all of you guys complete it before October 3rd. And provide them with qualitative and quantitative data that can provide a direction on how much money the community would support, what types of projects the community might support, and what percentage you are likely to see after a proposed bond hits the actual vote on election day. Every resident has the opportunity to fill this survey out one of 2 ways. You can either fill out the snail mail copy that you guys received in your mailboxes and send it on back to School Perceptions, or you can use your code and go online to fill it out that way if you prefer that method. If you in your household have more than one adult voting age human, you guys can ask the district office for an additional code, or 2 or 3, however many you need, and they have additional codes available for you guys. A couple reasons that we're asking you guys to fill out this survey. MAPS and the district team, the board really wants to gather as much qualitative and quantitative data as I mentioned earlier. So this is a really great way to give every community member in the Marquette district a voice in providing feedback to the district on what kind of projects you guys are interested in supporting and how much financial investment you'd like to make into your school buildings for your kiddos. 2 key factors that I like to highlight on this slide especially are the fact that this is an educational tool. So this is really a lovely way for the district, the board, to share with you guys the facilities issues that we're trying to address and what the district is facing day to day. So this 8-page document going out to everybody is a really great way to kind of give you guys an indicator of what's going on inside those school buildings. And this also, like I mentioned earlier, gives every community member, every taxpayer, an opportunity to provide feedback to the district. All right, next steps. So as I mentioned, we are gathering staff and community feedback through that survey. And then the district is also providing 2 information sessions. We're at number 2, so I'm glad you guys are here. Thank you for attending. But definitely wanted to give any community member an opportunity to bring your questions to this group. We'll also be recording these presentations and putting them on the website. So if you have friends or family or neighbors that weren't able to attend, please let them know that they can get all of this information on the district's website. Survey closes October 3rd, like I mentioned, so make sure you fill that survey out before. And then results will be presented by School Perceptions during the October 13th board meeting. And so we'll take those results from there, and the board and admin team will have a really great set of data to understand what you guys as a community are interested in moving forward with. And we'll pause here briefly for any additional questions or comments. The QR code will take you to the same form each time if you have additional questions, so you can always fill it out more if you have other questions that you guys would like to hear. I'm going to hand it over to Craig.
Just working on that wait time. All right, good evening, everyone. I am Craig Carmody. I work with IDI as an educational consultant supporting school districts with their pre-bond work. And I am going to take us through some school finance information. So we're going to start with the types of bonds available to schools for capital project improvements. So we have non-voted bonds that are available to schools. Those are generally for fairly small projects that schools might need to, for example, if a boiler suddenly went down and their funds available for that year were not going to be available to support that, they may have to go out and seek a bond in order to pay for that and then pay it off over a number of years. The other types of bonds available to schools are voted bonds. So there's 2 types of voted bonds. One would be a non-qualified bond where you're using the credit rating of the school. The other is when school districts go through the Michigan Department of Treasury. And that includes then that you're putting together an application that provides all of the work that you're planning to do with your estimates of what that might cost. The Department of Treasury then reviews that, makes sure that all of that information as far as the items that you have put in that application are compatible with what is allowed for use of bonds, as well as the estimates being in line with what the state allows. And those funds can be used for building construction, remodeling, purchasing buses, technology, and site improvements. As Zach mentioned earlier, In Michigan, there are 38 states that do provide in their annual allocations in their approved budgets to pay for infrastructure in schools. Michigan is one of 12 states that does not provide funding for schools. Michigan provides per pupil funding for schools. About 85% of that is, at least that's around the average for the state of Michigan, goes to salaries and benefits for staff, leaving about 15% for things such as the utilities of the school, for purchasing equipment, materials for classrooms and other programs that the school has, for transportation. So that does not, when all of that is said and done, as Zach mentioned earlier, that leaves very little if you actually had to do any type of major investment in capital projects at that point. As far as windows available for schools to seek a bond before voters, Michigan allows for three elections, May, August, and November, and it's always the first Tuesday of those months where elections are available to schools. Next, just kind of talking a little bit about millage impact, so the dollars and cents. So when schools put out a project, there's always a millage amount attached to a bond issue. And the way that for taxpayers is, we talk about the taxable value of a property. So it's not what your property, what you think it might sell for. It's not the state equalized valuation of that property or the SEV. It's the actual taxable value, which is usually it's going to be the lowest of those numbers. When you first purchase a property, your SEV and your taxable value are going to line up. But as you own that property longer, that is actually going to, you're going to see further separation, because your taxable value is limited to the annual CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, which this year was 3.8%, or a maximum of 5% in any year that the CPI exceeds 5%. So over time, and especially lately, as property values have increased fairly significantly, your taxable value has remained, or you've seen further separation in those two numbers. So when you look at your taxable value, if we took a taxable value of a property that was worth $100,000 at 1 mil, so the formula is $1 for every $1,000 of taxable value. So at 1 mil, it would be an annual increase of $100. At 1.5 mils, $150, 1.75 mils, $175, and 2 mils at $200. And you can extrapolate then from there what that taxable value, if it's, we've got the chart in here from anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 of taxable value, and those numbers, then you could just extrapolate those for any number then in between there. But that's the formula that is used for calculating the impact for taxpayers. Next, Zach did reference this graph prior, which shows where Marquette is in comparison to many other of the schools within the Upper Peninsula and within this region. As far as the state of Michigan is roughly about 4.5 mils per school district as far as the average. Now that does change from year to year as districts may pass bond issues, renew bond issues. Some millage rates may fall off, so that is a number that does fluctuate from year to year, but is usually right around 4.5 mils as a statewide average. And then this is just a sample of what someone might see on their property tax bill. This is using a taxable value of $100,000. But when you see a property tax bill that you might receive with your fall or with summer or winter taxes, it's going to have a number of things broken down. So you're going to see a millage impact for City of Marquette, for example, the county, the intermediate school district put in here debt or school bonds of 1.0. That's not an exact representation of where MAPS is, but it's just giving you an illustration. And then there are generally a lot of communities have some special millages such as libraries or things like that. So in this case, the when all of that is totaled, the millage rate is 31.8447 mills, which comes out to an annual tax of $3,184.47. So that's what somebody might see if they were to look at their annual tax bill and see everything that's broken down in there and what you're paying for as far as those services that you receive in your community. So with that, we will once again pause and let you fill out any questions that you may have during this session, and I am going to be turning it over then to Travis to go over a few more of the specifics that you might see in that survey and some of the things that are in consideration for the district.
Give it a few seconds here, then we'll move on. Yeah, I think, and as Zach had mentioned earlier too, if there's anything that comes up along the way, the QR code is good for any questions, even if it was something you could think of from a couple presenters ago. So. I don't see anybody typing in their phones. I'm gonna let it go here. So as Zach had mentioned, a few years, kind of working through last couple of few years here, having gone through walkthroughs with the buildings, and over the course of the last couple of years, really seeing the needs of the buildings themselves. We've got, I'm an architect myself. We've got mechanical, plumbing, electrical engineers, structural engineers in-house. Isaac with GEI as civil engineers. We've got a strong team to really be able to go through, look at all the facilities, see where the shortcomings are, see what may be needed, and knowing that even aside from the infrastructure within the facilities, that there's still needs, to Zach's point earlier, as far as student needs, as far as from programming, classroom spaces, and just the layouts in general for today's learning environments. So coming forward with our list a couple years ago of that $100 million for easy numbers, and then coupling that with the state study, there's a lot of work that really needs to be done out there. Knowing that, looking at kind of an overall list and knowing that until we really see what comes back from the survey, needing to prioritize what those are, so being able to tie the survey question into where that has kind of landed and how we got to that point is kind of where my overall list, as far as trying to be able to condense a really long document into a shortish list of what would be in that base project. To Zach's point earlier, I'd mentioned like the safe, warm, and dry piece. Obviously, school safety is a major piece, but from the warm and dry, you're really looking at infrastructure, HVAC, classroom units, the unit ventilators. So prioritizing the buildings and the infrastructure in the most critical need. Across the district, things could be and should be updated, but seeing the useful life on items that really need to be addressed first, which we've been over the last several years looking at with the district. Again, I think is with the sinking fund dollars has done a great job in being able to pick off on those high priority needs. Whether it be some of the boilers, there's roofs that end up being to the point of an emergency type of situation, to be able to kind of keep keep the facilities up and running and to the point with the roof, a dry facility, and keeping things going. Controls, boilers in those facilities from an energy efficiency standpoint. When you do get more efficient, you're saving the district dollars in the long run as well. So being able to look at those items, LED lighting is a big one that for a lot of districts, you're making that switch over to LEDs. Really, the payback on that is quite short in the grand scheme of things. Additional electrical, there's upgrades that are needed in some, especially the older facilities, looking at like between the high school, Bothwell, Van Den Boom, Graveret, Sandy Knoll. There's a lot of these facilities, they're just, especially in today's educational, with technology, there's major electrical needs, either more outlets and just infrastructure for technology in general. Aside from the infrastructure side of it, knowing that generally speaking, those aren't going to sell a bond, seeing and looking at barrier-free upgrades. There's with the elevators, restrooms, doors. I think restrooms across the district are extremely lacking from a barrier-free ADA accessibility standpoint. So looking at bringing those up to where they should be. Doors, getting away from the old knob style doors, going to levered handles at classrooms. Also able to bring in the security piece with classroom security locks and kind of kill two birds with one stone with being able to do some of those items. Again, bringing another level into seeing what we get from the community support. Renovations to kind of the classrooms, programs, academics in general, major overhauls for CTE wings, both at Bothwell and here at the high school. Shop spaces basically with that. CTE is kind of the nomenclature nowadays for it, but Kaufman Auditorium, hitting the music, arts at both Bothwell and here at the high school. Locker rooms at Bothwell and the high school are in dire need of full upgrades and renovations. Classroom renovations, really hitting like Graveret and Sandy Knoll, the buildings that really haven't been touched for a long time, looking at upgrading those facilities. And there's the high school media center here, the gym floor here is beyond its useful life. A lot of those learning spaces just really need upgrades. Additions and kind of major rebuild type of items, looking at rebuild of the press box, which is in extremely poor condition, and also looking at major dollars going into Bothwell, looking at phasing an addition over there, which will help from being able to phase moving the kids around from a learning standpoint, but really a gut and redo of that second floor at Bothwell is extremely high on the list. It's one of those concepts in education that did not last very long. The old pod concept, open concept, and moving towards a learning environment where the kids can actually learn. Furnishings across the district is a huge piece. Every building is in need of that. There's outdated across the board, and there's so many options now for flexible learning spaces, kids being able to come together, collaborate together with the little ones in the elementary, different style seating, either soft seating, some wobbly seats for the fidgety ones, and being able to really kind of break off some quiet spaces, and there's a lot that can be done with furnishings now as well. Additional playground work, there's been improvements over the last couple of years with that, but I know even in talking with staff, there's still needs with that. Abatement, asbestos and lead-based paint is always something that no matter where we're renovating, anything that we're touching is going to need to be abated. And as things get improved across the district, being able to remove those materials is huge. With that, moving to kind of priority 2 items. Again, depending on what we hear back from the surveys, there's additional infrastructure needs. The ones that are still needed, but maybe not as critical on as those on the base list. More controls, more electrical work, additional finishes, flooring, ceilings. Aside from those areas that are scheduled to be renovated, if we've got thousands of square feet of corridors and other and ancillary spaces that the ceilings and floors still need updates. Emergency generators, additional media centers and libraries, more classrooms, fire alarm upgrades, more windows. Corridor lockers is one that's depending on how large a project gets, is something that can be upgraded as well. Always a need for additional technology upgrades, more security cameras, although there's been a lot added. Kids seem to find the areas that aren't covered, so adding more of those is always on the radar. And additional exterior improvements. The windows at Bothwell are single pane, it blows my mind. But being able to look at additional window replacements, facade upgrades, the outdated, the metal siding that's over at Bothwell, same with the pod here. Being able to start addressing some of those aesthetic needs to be able to, just from an overall district side of things. With that, we're still gaining feedback. Obviously, the second night of public listening sessions, and I was over at the alternative high school today. I'll be here tomorrow for 4 hours listening to staff, getting feedback, and then Sandy Knoll on Thursday. Those are the last 3 that I've got to chat with. They're still working. Still working.
Yeah, at least for now.
Sort of. So sitting down with all the staff, started off, I think 2 weeks ago, I was at Bothwell for a few hours, Cherry Creek, Superior Hills, Great Barrett. Sorry, I'm not a performer. And really being able to get feedback from all the staff, teachers. I apologize. Staff and teachers to get an idea of where those needs are. We're not in the building every day. I know is it easier if I just talk, or do you need it on microphone?
I wonder if it's a bad speaker. Did we kill that last night?
I coach as well, so I can be loud if we want to go that route. So looking at what I've really been telling the staff and teachers is, we're not in the buildings every day. We can do a walkthrough and cover a building and see what we see over a course of a day or two. But we're not the ones using the spaces. We're not in there. We're not teachers that are in there on a daily basis, weekly basis, every year after year, to know what some of those needs are, additional needs. So being able to get their feedback, getting their input, and really just being there to listen to them and understand what they need to have success moving forward, goes back to, make sure I'm on that, with the priority 2, this list in general, again, like Zach had mentioned earlier, from a time frame standpoint, once we see what that survey says, as far as community engagement and support, being able to come up with that scope, those priorities, it's a fluid document. There's things that may change, and it's like, oh, we didn't really think of this or that, and we're hearing that loud and clear from some of the staff members. So some of those items really could change prior to going onto the ballot, and that's really the main intent of all of these items, getting feedback from the community, and being able to take something to the voters that we feel strongly about. Beyond the building priorities in general, I know we've chatted, Craig had chatted a little bit on the tax impacts for that. It's just another slide showing some of those items depending on which is in the survey as well, but showing how those impact families and taxpayers. Priority 3 and 4, if we get that amount of support from the community, the priority 3 item that's shown here would be an indoor, multi-purpose facility. Our nice seasons, especially during the school year, are quite short up here. So whether if you've got any of the indoor sports, track and field, maybe football potentially in the fall, if you've got marching band, that just needing a larger space indoors, baseball, softball, golf, all those type of things, those having an opportunity for the indoor practice facility would be a huge benefit to the students and staff. And a lot of districts that we work with across the state open up those facilities for the community for certain hours as well. So there could be a potential depending on what the support is shown. Same thing for kind of another, call it an add-on, if you will, as those numbers climb. The final question on there is for an early childcare facility. That's through the last several years. It's been a difficult piece in the community for finding childcare for parents of young ones. So, and again, those overviews with those costs and tax implications are in the survey as well.
All done?
Yep.
Okay, so real quick, contact information, our district website, we actually have a tab on our main page for facilities planning, and probably not in front of you because I'm working two different devices at the same time. So anyway, the website has a facility planning tab. The email is always available, our phone number, and social media accounts. But I do want to say thank you again for coming, and I want to keep this presentation on the QR code where you can insert or submit questions or comments, because that's going to continue to be available as we do this little Q&A. So please do take your phones out and scan the QR code or fill out one of those comment cards. But at this point in time, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I guess I'll start with Linda and Courtney to see what we might have in the hopper for questions and comments so far, and if there aren't any, I'll turn it over to the audience.
I do not currently have anything from this survey, so I'll open that up to you, Zach.
Okay, well, I will open it up to the audience. Earlier today, I was working on an FAQ, and I guess I could orchestrate my own Q&A if I needed to. That would be a little awkward, but I would do it anyway. We don't have to belabor the point or extend this meeting, but if there's any pressing questions, anybody in the audience that would like this panel to answer any questions that you have. Yes, sir.
Why not start it off?
Sure.
The community's looked down upon Bothwell for probably the last 30 or 40 years. Is there any thought about putting that in the grade and building a middle school near the high school campus to facilitate with transportation, sports there?
Well, I was not the superintendent at the time,
I know.
but I've been around a while.
Yeah.
And that particular concept was explored and proposed in a previous bond proposal or bond issue, ballot issue. And I think, without getting into the weeds, the takeaway that I've ascertained from conversations with my predecessors is that the community made it pretty clear that they wanted us to use what we have, use the buildings that we have, and maximize the resources available, and not necessarily make that large of a change. The other thing, having been the assistant principal at the middle school and also a teacher at the high school, I've actually covered all grade levels in this district. There was concern about the proximity between the middle school students and the high school students, those being very different programs, and the interfacing that would happen on the bus, in the lunchroom, in the hallways, etc. So those are the two, I guess, anecdotes that I recall
That's
that
all I remember too.
caused that to not be a favorable outcome for the district. So I think going into this particular process, our emphasis was very much on using what we have. There's no extravagant, no major builds. There is one addition at Bothwell, and that's necessary because that particular building, especially the second floor, requires such a significant renovation that the only way to be able to do that and redesign it, if you will, is by putting in an addition on that building. There's some one-off structures like the press box that would need to be replaced, but essentially the brick and mortar of our infrastructure is solid, even if it's older. Thinking about Graverette, that building is solid. It just isn't updated. So anyway, hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah. We are putting additions on all our elementary schools, so
We did put additions on our elementary schools as part of the last bond. That last bond was about 0.4, just a little shy of 0.4 mils, a small mill rate, if you will, and it included additions to Bothwell, or excuse me, to Cherry Creek and Superior Hills. That's also the bond that got the auxiliary gym built. We had a renovation of the football field, the maker space here at the high school, more accessible entrance at Kaufman. It covered a lot of different areas, but it did include an addition. And again, knowing the class sizes before and after that particular bond proposal, it was very significant, the change that happened. Being a principal at Superior Hills, I can attest that there just wasn't enough room. But after the last bond failed that we alluded to, there wasn't a realignment under my predecessor where we onboarded Graverette as a fourth elementary school, and that also was a key factor in maximizing the efficiency of the use of our space.
How many square feet is Bothwell?
Could you pull up that square footage document? Do you have that on the ready? I know I have it in my files, but I want to do my best at not ad-libbing. I have a number in my head, and I'm nervous about saying it out loud and getting it wrong.
I'd like to see how close you are.
I just pulled it up. I have 145,886 square feet, built in 1971.
Yeah, I do have like 140,000.
Yeah. Our largest building by far is a high school, which is almost 270,000 square feet.
So, I mean, just knowing costs of new construction,
yeah.
you know, 400
I
a
totally
foot,
understand.
that would be 58 million right there. Just, I mean, I would love a new Bothwell.
So the state did us multiple favors in releasing that infrastructure study, and I've used that as leverage, even as recently as Monday with our legislators, reminding them that they released that public infrastructure study and told us and told you that we had over $100 million of critical infrastructure needs. Okay, now what? I talked about that a little bit earlier. The other thing they did, which you may have seen, was they told us how much it would cost to repair our buildings. That was over 350 million. Or excuse me, to replace our buildings. Thank you.
Right.
350 plus million to replace our buildings. And if I remember correctly, replacing Bothwell alone was far exceeding the amount that we're talking about for this particular proposal.
Be pretty close, yeah.
Sad.
Is early childhood an existing program that needs a new home, or was it a new program altogether?
We currently have a pilot, a GSRP pilot in our junior kindergarten, where we're exploring some of those additional funding streams and adding some resources, some curriculum at the JK level, because for students that qualify, and those are essentially your young fives. But no, we do not currently have an early childhood program. We did at one time in the district, and I guess without getting too far into detail, that I should wait for planning to occur before expressing. I will say that there's an opportunity, not just with an early childhood center, but because of property that the district owns adjacent to the high school, of having that particular program be close enough in proximity to the high school that we could create programming at the high school in partnership with the early childhood program, much like our middle college and some of our apprenticeship programs, where kids could get hands-on experience and even maybe a certification coming out of high school. Yes, ma'am.
I know that enrollment in the high school has dropped. Are you using 100% of the building right now? And if you're not, how is this construction changes, is that going to impact some of those unused spaces?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a great answer because, as Travis said, a lot of this is evolving as we get feedback from the community. But I will say, if you walk just next door, as you go, we're in what we refer to as a pod, which, by the way, is especially warm because the AC unit isn't currently working. FYI, I feel it with the sport coat, if you know what I mean. But if you just go next door, you'll see just how much work this particular area needs. And the truth is, it's not usable space currently for many purposes, but it could be. So you could repurpose spaces in this building to maximize use of this particular facility. And I do expect that we would use what we have. There's not significant unused space. There's a lot of programming needs that the general public wouldn't necessarily understand that could be made available, not just to MAPS, not just to our high school students, but programming that could be made available to students through especially special ed programming, different levels of need that kids come to school with, where I think you could take some of our spaces and you could make them much more accommodating for those special populations. And right now that's not happening because some of the spaces just aren't usable. They're not practical for that purpose, if you know what I mean. Thank you. Yes.
I've had a couple folks ask if any of that indoor recreation would be available to the public at any time.
Well, I think that's very much a possibility with that particular type of space. Anybody, and I used to be an athletic director and have coached, anybody, especially in the springtime, that is involved in track or baseball or softball and various other programs, not just athletics, extracurricular practices. He mentioned, or extracurricular activities. He mentioned marching band as an example. Anybody that's had to organize and facilitate programming in the springtime knows just how difficult it is. Our track program really is, I think, hampered and in many cases sold short when it comes to being able to compete with other districts that aren't in such a harsh climate, especially in the spring. So to answer your question, yes, but it would certainly, the focus would be on our own programming, and there are many needs for that type of space. But there's obviously times during the day and off seasons in the summer especially where I think that space could be utilized by the community. Absolutely. I guess one of the questions that I know will probably come up is, will this fix everything? I think the reality is the sinking fund and some of the money that we put aside through various creative measures to deal with infrastructure has been great as a stopgap or as I guess a Band-Aid. And we have made significant investments in our infrastructure. $3 million this past summer alone, I mentioned. I think with especially depending on the level of support that we get from the community, with a significant investment such like what we're talking about this evening, I think what it would do is allow us to use the sinking fund for what it was purposed to do, and that's the ongoing maintenance of our buildings, rather than the sole or the primary source of revenue for dealing with infrastructure as vast and extensive as we have. So that's a question I expected that might come up. The other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of these fixes are going to improve efficiency. Travis mentioned lighting, LED lighting. Obviously with boilers and different HVAC systems, you're going to get significant energy improvement. We lose a lot of revenue, or we lose a lot of money that could be that we could use for programming because of a lack of efficiency. And certainly electrical and heating is easy examples to give for our infrastructure that would, I think, allow us to use the sinking fund more extensively, or at least to extend those dollars across more projects than we are currently. Okay, I'm not going to do any more asking and answering of my own questions. But if anybody else has a question, I'd again, the panel is here. It's a pretty unique opportunity to have everybody from the panel in one place at one time. So, anybody else?
Under an optimal situation where the survey came back at the highest level, would there be any, what would be the next ones?
If we were able,
Priorities 1 through 4?
if all 4 priorities were passed, I think we would have our hands full with managing that much revenue and organizing, because we're limited in public schools when it comes to improving our infrastructure, because we have 3,200 students in our buildings most of the time. So we're limited by the summer for many of our infrastructure improvements, taking that much investment. And I think about Todd and his crew. He's going to work. We brought on a construction manager for the first time in my career. Myron Construction is playing that role. We've brought them on just because this extensive of a project is beyond what we can manage internally, and he and his group would help manage working with a lot of the subcontractors. So the short answer is, I think we'd have our hands full for a significant or for a number of years before we could revisit whether or not we've recaptured some of that principal. Property values have come up. Is there an opportunity to revisit with the community on additional projects, additional fixes? Because the reality is we still have buildings that are 60 years old, and they're not going to get any newer as time goes on. So I think we're going to be able to take a breath, though, for quite some time, and I'm looking forward to that personally. And I guess I haven't invested a lot of my time thinking about the next phase, because I'm so focused on trying to get this initial push done.
Yeah, that's still 20 years ago, and I don't like the round pod, and I don't like popcorn. That's because I went to Green Rec.
Yeah, the pod concept is something from the 70s that isn't necessarily working for our 21st century.
And Jammer is 40 years old, which is
Yeah.
a good facility now. But
Absolutely.
we can't get funding that way.
We have much different options for funding than the universities do. That is for certain. Well, I'm going to go ahead and cut you all loose. I really very much appreciate you coming, your support, and welcome your feedback as we move forward. This isn't the only or the last time you'll have a chance to provide feedback, but thank you. Have a great night.